So Charlene, we have been getting so many queries about telehealth, cross-border implications, and minimizing medical legal risk. So I thought let's talk about it.
Brilliant, let's do that, Elaine. Now, can you just perhaps start by telling us what's Rdl and Lowe's experience in respect of handling medical legal matters?
Why are you asking me this question? You know the answer, Charlene. We have
They
been
may not
doing-
know, Elaine.
Okay, fair enough. Rdl and Lowe, we've been doing healthcare-related work over 20 years now. So the firm's experience would go from dispute resolution, complaints before medical counsel, dental counsel, to healthcare-related documentation. So the full array. So, and in this current environment, we are receiving a lot of queries about digitalization of healthcare and definitely about telehealth consults.
Yeah. And with that breadth of experience, Elaine, what are some of the main medical legal problems that you've come across throughout the years?
So, you know, funnily enough, digitalization la, online la, internet la, I think the main problem remain the same, and I'm going to name two.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is documentation or the lack of. Number two, the ostrich attitude.
The ostrich attitude,
The
ladies.
ostrich attitude.
Okay, let's talk about the first one, documentation. Elaine, since I started practice not very long ago, but still,
She's still young, not young.
I am, thank you. It's been a problem then. It's a problem now, and I suspect it will probably continue to be a problem in the future. Now, why do you think that's an issue?
So, you know, I keep asking myself those questions, you know, when I'm obviously late at night, sort of thinking about my cases. So when we do sort of handle our medical legal cases, a lot of the times when we ask the doctors this question, did you have the discussion with the patient? Did you explain the procedure? Did you explain the risk? The answers are almost always, yes, I did.
Yeah.
That is my practice, Elaine. That is my practice, Charlene. The next question any lawyer will ask is, brilliant. Let's then look at your medical records. Did you make a note of that discussion? The doctor will then say, I'm sure I did, Elaine. I'm sure I did, Charlene. We then spend the next day or so trawling through the medical records, only to find that, unfortunately, I would probably say 50% of the time, that notation is just not there.
Yeah.
So why is this happening? I suspect, I mean, fair enough. The focus of the treatment, the focus of that consult must be the treatment itself, the diagnosis, getting that science right. So documenting it takes a backstage. At that point in time, it takes a backstage. So when we ask, most of the time the answer is, I don't really have time, you expect me to write everything, there's no space or whatever. So unfortunately, it takes a backstage at that point. But, you know, when there's a complaint, then it will take center stage.
Do not be an ostrich.
Mm.
Would you mind explaining a little further about what that means?
Okay. So an ostrich is an animal that buries its head in the sand, isn't it? And we see this happening quite a lot sometimes. When there is an adverse event or when things don't go as planned, and of course, like anything in life, you can't guarantee outcomes.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how brilliant a doctor what you are. And there's an adverse event. So what you don't want to see your client do, your lawyer, is for that doctor to bury his or her head in the sand and pretend that the event didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because pretending that it didn't happen doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did happen. So, do not be an ostrich. Do not be an ostrich.
Do not be an ostrich, but be a...
Be a matador. Take the bull by its horns. That is what I would say.
So doctors, apart from being called to the vocation where you actually heal people, you're now being asked to be a matador. Go down to the ring, be a matador, do the fight.
Do the fight. Explain to the patient what has happened to the patient. Well, that's absolutely vital.
And I think the quicker you face reality and the facts, the easier it is to come to some sort of solution, or at least try to find a solution for any issue.
Because you must remember, the care continues.
Yeah.
There's an adverse event, but what is next? What is your plan next? How do you intend to take care of the patient next? That conversation must happen. Must happen.
Brilliant. I think you've summed it up really nicely, Elaine. Now, I'm just going to quickly talk about medical legal risk as well, but I'm going to take it slightly further, right? With this migration of health services online, right? The world's becoming borderless, right? We hear that term all the time. So what are some of the medical legal risks that's associated with telehealth, for example?
So I think the traditional risks remain the same. Added to that is the fact that the doctor, I think, must be comfortable with technology, with the know-how, must go through some training, I think. And the patient at the receiving end must also be comfortable with this mode of consult. If there is discomfort either on this side of the divide or the other side of the divide, the risk, I think, of a medical legal complaint will be heightened. So make sure there is comfort on both sides.
And how does the doctor make sure that the patient's comfortable? I mean, do you literally go and ask the patient, are you comfortable with this? How do they go about doing it, Elaine?
Well, I think there are different ways. I mean, this is that human, technology, but you still need that human
Yeah.
touch, isn't it? So you should have that discussion. The patient must know about the limitations of virtual. Obviously, if the patient is complaining about pain, for example, in the patient's
Right.
abdomen,
Yep.
the doctor is not able to palpate the
Yep.
abdomen. So, you need to decide, are you comfortable to continue with this consult and give a diagnosis and perhaps prescribe treatment without palpating if you're not stopped? On the other side of the coin, the patient must know, look, I can't do an examination, but I am comfortable, say, with this consult, but are you? There are limitations to this. I might not be able to see the redness very clear, for example,
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
So if you stop the teleconsult, what then do you do next?
Convert it to an in-person.
Right.
Convert it to an in-person.
Right now, Elaine, when we talk about telehealth, teleconsultations, right, it's virtual. So sometimes it feels a little one step removed, if I could put it that way. And sometimes doctors or health practitioners, they also associate the medical legal risk that's associated with consultations to be a step removed. Now, do you think that's founded? Can you still, for example, be sued if you are consulting a patient who's not in Malaysia, who's in a different country altogether? Is that still a possibility?
So, like, if you're not in Malaysia,
How are they
can't
going to get
sue me.
you? I mean,
The
I'm in a different
law's
country.
arms are very long.
So there's no escape. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, you think about it, right? Virtual consultations, what does that mean? Telehealth. I'm here, you are in a different country. Say, let's take the example. Because of that consult, I say omit to give you certain information,
Yeah.
or my diagnosis is wrong because I didn't get your full history, so on and so forth, and something then happens to the patient. And that patient is in, say, US, different country, right? That patient, of course, has a right to complain, to sue. That right is there, doesn't matter where you are. Where can that patient sue? Where can that patient bring the complaint? I would say the patient will probably be at liberty to decide. If, for example, the complication arose when the patient is in US and the consult is done when the patient is in US, the United States may very well take jurisdiction. So let's be aware, yes, you may not be near me, but definitely I can be sued wherever.
Yeah.
And the complaint may also be in a different country. So be careful.
So regardless of the platform, it doesn't distinguish the right of the patient.
No.
Okay. Now,
And that's correct.
I would think,
I think
so
that's
too.
right.
It ought to
One
be that
must
way.
always have the right
Yeah.
to sue and complain.
Regardless
Yes.
where you are. Yes, I agree entirely. And when we talk about this teleconsult and the risk of, the medical legal risks that still are pertinent, right? What are some of the considerations that medical practitioners would have to consider in addition to what they usually would? Sorry, is that a bit convoluted?
So
I'm
let me,
think-
let me just
I'm
so you're
thinking
thinking of
more-
the extra stuff.
I'm thinking more about yes, in Malaysia now, indemnity is
Oh,
compulsory.
okay.
But
You're right.
is there anything more?
So-
is it just indemnities that
So
enough?
in Malaysia, indemnity is compulsory, but we also know there is no minimum
Yeah.
indemnity, for example, right? So it's very sort of just make sure you have cover, basically. So that is mandatory. So if you are doing telehealth and you're doing telehealth cross-border, please be careful. Make sure that your indemnifier or your insurer in certain cases covers that mode of consult, number one. Number two, make sure your cover is sufficient
Yeah.
or adequate, because, so for example, if you are having a virtual consult with a patient in a foreign jurisdiction, something then happens, say you are then sued, right, because of that consult. So the things that the court may take into account is, hey, the living expenses in that jurisdiction may be vastly different from Malaysia.
Yeah.
The patient's earnings will be in a foreign currency, for example. So if your cover is RM1, probably not going to cut it, Charlotte. It's not probably going to cut. especially if you're doing telehealth, say with a patient in US or in countries, where the living expenses are a lot higher than Malaysia.
Right, Elaine, I think awareness in respect of getting coverage or indemnity or insurance, depending on the case, is fairly, I think doctors are quite aware of that nowadays. But I want to talk about the adequacy of coverage, especially in respect of telehealth consultations, cross-border consultations. Do you think that's important?
Absolutely. I think doctors need to be sensible about the level of coverage.
Yeah.
So take into account the nature of your practice. And if the nature of your practice includes cross-border consults, where you have a patient in another country and you're giving virtual consults, if something goes wrong, that patient may have the choice to sue in a different country, different system, and that court in that country, or even let's say they sue here, the court will still take into account the patient's, the living expenses of the country where that patient resides, for example, and the patient's earnings may be in a foreign currency.
Yeah.
So, bottom line, Charlene, you don't want to have a consult with a patient in a foreign jurisdiction that's living in an expensive jurisdiction and have 1 ringgit cover. You don't want that. Okay?
It's not going to bring you anywhere. It's not going to provide any coverage.
No, it's not. Because the law as it stands in Malaysia is there's no minimum coverage.
Yes.
So you can take, technically.
Yeah. You just need coverage. It doesn't say how
exactly.
much. Yeah.
So let's be sensible. Let's be sensible.
Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about the laws governing telehealth. Are there any in Malaysia, Elaine?
That is an embarrassing question.
Why is it embarrassing?
Because we had this Telemedicine Act, and I see people still quoting it nowadays.
Yeah.
And you and I know that act, lovely intentions, I'm sure, but just never came into force. So that act just never applied. So there is no specific act, Charlene.
So what's the fallback position?
Fallback is common law. Common law. So it doesn't mean if there is no legislation, there is no law.
Right.
The law of a doctor making sure that they comply with certain standards of care, that is still there. That is common law.
Now, still in the telehealth realm, what are some of the impediments, maybe the main impediments that you feel healthcare practitioners face?
So I've been a bit sad, I think, that not more practitioners are embracing this, because
Right.
I do think access to healthcare is important. And I think telehealth will give more people access, I feel. But the impediments, I would say now, 2 really. Either no confidence or too confident.
So extreme sides of the scale.
Extreme, both ends of the scale we're seeing.
Let's explore this scale,
Right.
So let's start with people who, what do you say, no confidence.
No confidence.
What do they not have confidence in?
I think it's just something new, perhaps for some. It's the technology.
Right.
And it's just, lacking that self-belief that I can learn something new. I can decipher this technology. I can be trained. I can equip myself with knowledge, and I won't mess up. So I think that confidence is lacking.
Now, Elaine, let's explore the other side of the scale. Overconfidence.
Over pula. So you must remember, okay, telehealth, I did say, back to basics and all that. But there are some nuances, I think, that you need to be familiar with, and you need to know about. So definitely, I think anybody who wants to embrace virtual consults, telehealth consultations, must undergo some basic minimum training to make sure they are aware of the limitations, that's important, of these telehealth consultations, what they cannot do, what works, what doesn't work, and how to work the whole technology. Okay? So let's not be reckless. Let's embrace it, but we cannot be reckless. Let's get trained.
To summarize that, it's for those who are a bit more on the cautious side to step out in faith and embrace this change, right? And on those who are a little bit on the overside to perhaps be slightly more moderated and be aware, I guess, of the pitfalls that comes together with telehealth.
So the answer to both sides of the divide is the same. Get trained. Same answer. Get your knowledge, get trained.
Now, Elaine, let's talk a little bit about consent. There's a lot of anxiety over this consent
Are we still
issue.
talking about
We
consent?
are, and it's important. I do apologize. We have to go through this. Now, do you think that anxiety is well-founded?
So consent has been a hotbed of medical legal since time immemorial, I would say. Every conference, every training, every workshop, people will ask questions about consent. Grappling with issues, medical legal issues relating to consent, I think is probably at the forefront of a lot of practitioners at the moment. So add to that is this telehealth consult. So you can
Yeah.
imagine that anxiety being heightened.
Yes.
So I think, is it well founded? Your question is, it is understandable. Let me put it that way. I think the concern about consent is understandable. Let's, however, try and give some comfort or assurance. Right? So all the basics that one knows by now, hopefully one knows the basics about consent, one continues.
Yeah.
The patient must be aware of the overall procedure, must understand that procedure, what's going to happen to him or her. The material risks must be told to the patient, and take any questions that the patient may have. That's sort of, in a way, a sort of a summary of the basics.
Right.
We add to that telehealth. What else does the patient need to know before we can say that adequate consent has been taken? It really is the limitations, isn't it, of that virtual consult. So if the patient understands the limitations, accepts those limitations, then we proceed to do it virtually or through telehealth.
Right. And do you have any cases, reported cases or otherwise, dealing with telehealth issues?
So we have come across two, one an Australian case and one an English case.
Right.
In both cases, the sort of common denominator, I think, is the doctor doing the telehealth consult failing to take appropriate care, I think, to ensure that he had the full medical history, had a look at the patient's previous records prior to making the diagnosis and prescribing the medication. So if you think about it, the issues in those two cases had nothing to do with technology. It was all very basic.
Elaine, I think it's brilliant that Malaysia, through the MMC, has actually taken the first steps to recognize that there's this new platform of having consultations with patients. But I think the reality is we need further guidance. Now, to very quickly wrap up, Elaine, what are some of the take-home points for today?
So take-home points, Confucius says must follow 5 C's. First C, must comply. Comply with all relevant legal and ethical obligations. Second C, consider. Consider whether or not a virtual consult or a telehealth consult is appropriate for that particular condition or situation of the patient. Third C, clinical judgment. Always exercise your clinical judgment. Ensure that your doctor's head is never off. Telehealth, whatever health, clinical judgment, absolutely vital. Fourth C, consent. Take consent. When I say take consent, what do I mean? Ensure for a telehealth consult, the patient understands the limitations of that virtual consult. And last but not least, check your indemnity. So make sure, check, make sure that your indemnity covers that telehealth consult, and you check that you can practice telehealth with that patient residing in that particular jurisdiction. That is my take-home point.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We hope that that has helped you and given you insight in one way or another. And just to conclude, remember what Confucius said, although I always thought Confucius was a man, but obviously Confucius takes the form of a beautiful lady.
Oh my God, and an even more beautiful interviewer. Raja Dara and Lo signing out. Bye.
Bye.